I was about to board a cruise ship when my son's text message destroyed me in 6 words. "You're not coming. Just real family. Real family." As if the woman who gave birth to him, raised him alone for 34 years, and just finished paying off his mortgage 1 month ago didn't qualify as real family. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we continue, please subscribe and hit that notification bell, and let us know where in the world you're watching from in the comments. Let me take you back to where this all started, to the moment I realized my own son had been using me like an ATM with a heartbeat. It was a Tuesday morning in late June when everything fell apart. I stood in my living room, suitcase by the door, wearing my favorite floral maxi dress. The one with the tiny yellow sunflowers that always made me feel younger than my 66 years. My straw tote sat packed with sunscreen, a paperback I'd been saving for vacation, and enough excitement to power a small city. This cruise had been planned for months. 3 weeks of island hopping with my son, Andrew, and his wife, Lauren. 3 weeks of finally being included, of making memories with the family I'd sacrificed everything to support. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting Andrew to tell me he was on his way to pick me up. Instead, the message on my screen made my hands start shaking. "Mom, plans changed. You're not coming with us. Lauren wants just real family." I read it 3 times, then 4. Then I lost count because the words kept blurring together as tears welled up in my eyes. Real family. The phrase echoed in my head like a slap that kept landing over and over again. I sat down heavily on the sofa, still gripping my phone, trying to process what had just happened. This wasn't a miscommunication or a scheduling conflict. This was deliberate exclusion, delivered via text message like I was some acquaintance they'd forgotten to uninvite to a party. But here's what they didn't know. Here's what my son and his wife had somehow forgotten in their rush to erase me from their perfect vacation. That house they were living in, the one with the gourmet kitchen and the landscaped backyard, the deed was in my name. And just 4 weeks earlier, I had transferred the final mortgage payment from my retirement account into their loan, $53,000 over 5 years. I'd kept track of every penny, not because I expected repayment, but because I'm the kind of person who remembers sacrifices even when the people you make them for conveniently forget. I want you to understand something about my relationship with Andrew and Lauren. This cruise cancellation wasn't an isolated incident. It was the final insult in a pattern that had been building for years, ever since my son met Lauren Mitchell at a corporate conference 5 years ago. Before her, Andrew called me every Sunday. We had dinner together at least twice a month. He asked my opinion on everything from job offers to what color to paint his apartment. I wasn't just his mother. I was his friend, his confidant, his safe place. Then Lauren arrived, and slowly, methodically, I was erased. It started small. Sunday phone calls became every other week, then monthly, then almost never. Dinner invitations dried up. When I suggested getting together, there was always a reason why it wouldn't work. Lauren had plans. They were busy with a project. They needed couple time. The excuses were endless, and always delivered with just enough politeness to make me feel guilty for asking. And here's the insidious part, the thing that made it so hard to fight back. They never completely cut me off. They kept me just close enough to be useful. When they needed a down payment for the house, Andrew called. When the kitchen renovation went over budget by $18,000, my phone rang. When Lauren's car broke down, and they needed a vehicle for 3 weeks while waiting for insurance, suddenly I was family again. And I gave, God help me, I gave every single time because that's what mothers do. That's what I thought family meant. But I was learning a painful lesson about the difference between being needed and being valued. The worst part? They'd gotten so comfortable using me that they'd stopped even pretending to be grateful. Last Christmas, I bought gifts for everyone, including expensive educational toys for my 4-year-old granddaughter, Bella. Lauren sent a group text thank you, The kind of impersonal message you send to distant relatives you barely know. No phone call, no personal acknowledgement. Just, "Thanks for the gifts, everyone," with a generic smiley face emoji. When I mentioned to Andrew that I'd hoped to see them open the presents in person, he sighed like I was being difficult and said they'd been too busy with Lauren's family to fit in another gathering. Lauren's family. That phrase should have been my first clue. I'd been excluded from Bella's baby shower 2 years ago. I found out about the event through Instagram, scrolling through photos of Lauren's mother and sisters and cousins all gathered around a cake decorated with little pink elephants, the same elephants I'd told Andrew I wanted to make for my granddaughter's nursery. When I gently asked Andrew why I hadn't been invited, he stammered something about it being just for Lauren's side of the family and her close friends. The implication was clear. I was neither. Then came their 5th anniversary party 8 months ago. I didn't even get the courtesy of an excuse that time. I saw the photos online, saw the elegant dinner party with at least 40 people in attendance, and realized I hadn't just been excluded. I'd been deliberately hidden. None of Andrew's childhood friends were there either. It was as if Lauren had systematically removed every trace of his life before her, and my son had let it happen. But I kept helping. When the pandemic hit, and they both faced reduced hours at work, I paid their mortgage for 7 months straight. When property taxes came due, and they claimed they didn't have the cash flow, I covered it. 3 years in a row, I covered it. I dipped into my retirement savings, the money I'd been carefully building since my husband died 12 years ago, and I funneled it into their life while mine got smaller and smaller. And still, I told myself I was doing the right thing. I was being a good mother. I was supporting my only child and his family. I was ensuring my granddaughter had stability and security. All the things my own mother had done for me, I was passing forward. Except my mother had been appreciated. My mother had been included. My mother had never been called not real family by the son she'd raised alone after his father's death. So when I received that text message on Tuesday morning, something inside me shifted. It wasn't the hot rush of anger or the crushing weight of sadness. It was something colder and more calculating. It was clarity, crystal clear, ice water clarity about exactly what had been happening and exactly what I needed to do about it. I stood up from the sofa and walked to my study. My hands had stopped shaking. In fact, I felt steadier than I had in years. I opened the drawer where I kept important documents and pulled out the blue folder labeled Andrew's House. Inside was every piece of paperwork related to the property, the original deed with my name as primary owner, the mortgage documents I'd co-signed, the payment receipts going back 5 years, and most importantly, the transfer papers I'd never signed, the ones that would have made Andrew and Lauren the legal owners. They'd asked me to sign them a dozen times over the years. "Just a formality, Mom," Andrew would say. "We should really get this cleaned up for tax purposes." But I'd always found a reason to delay, not because I didn't trust him, at least not consciously, but because some instinct deep in my gut kept whispering that I shouldn't give away my leverage, that once I signed those papers, once I made them the legal owners, I would lose the last shred of value I held in their eyes. Looking at those unsigned papers now, I realized my instincts had been right. I picked up my phone and called Mark Davis, the attorney who'd handled my husband's estate and had been my trusted advisor for over a decade. He answered on the second ring. "Mark, I need to meet with you tomorrow morning," I said, my voice steady and calm. "It's about Andrew's house. I want to sell it." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Julie, are you sure? This is a big decision. Maybe we should talk through—" "Tomorrow morning," I repeated. 9 o'clock if you're available. I've already made up my mind." I hung up before he could ask more questions, before he could plant seeds of doubt or guilt or maternal obligation. This decision wasn't coming from emotion. It was coming from a place of pure, rational self-preservation. They had shown me exactly what I was worth to them. Now I was going to show them what they should have valued all along. That night, I barely slept, not because of guilt or second thoughts, but because my mind was racing through logistics. The next morning, I arrived at Mark's office with the blue folder and a yellow legal pad covered in notes. Mark looked concerned when I walked in, the kind of gentle, paternal concern that usually makes people reconsider drastic actions. But I wasn't most people, and this wasn't a rash decision made in anger. "Julie, walk me through what's happened," Mark said, settling into his chair across from me. I told him everything. The years of financial support, the systematic exclusion from family events, the cruise text message that had finally broken through my denial. When I finished, Mark was quiet for a long moment, studying the documents I'd spread across his desk. "Legally, the house is yours," he finally said. "You're the primary owner on the deed. You can sell it at any time without needing their permission or even giving them advance notice. But Julie, this is your son. Have you thought about the implications? The relationship damage?" "The relationship was already damaged," I said quietly. "I've just been too afraid to admit it. All I'm doing now is protecting myself from further exploitation." Mark nodded slowly. "What about their belongings in the house?" "We give them reasonable time to remove personal items. 30 days is standard, correct?" "That's correct." He pulled out a fresh legal pad and started taking notes. "If you're serious about this, we need to move carefully but quickly. I can connect you with a real estate agent who specializes in discreet, fast sales. No public listings, no yard signs, just private showings to serious buyers with cash." "Perfect," I said. "How quickly can we move?" "If the buyer is motivated in paying cash, 2 weeks from offer to closing." I thought about Andrew and Lauren on their cruise, the one I'd helped pay for with the credit card still linked to their reservation. I thought about them sipping cocktails on the deck, getting couples massages at the spa, taking sunset sailing excursions, all while I sat at home, excluded and dismissed. A cold smile touched my lips. "Let's do it," I said. "And Mark, I want the closing date to be exactly when they return from the cruise, not before. Not after. I want them to come home to a done deal." Mark's eyebrows rose slightly, but he didn't argue. He'd been a lawyer long enough to know when a client had reached the point of no return. We spent the next 2 hours going over every detail, making sure the sale would be airtight, legally unassailable, and swift as a blade. By noon, I'd signed a contract with the real estate agent. By Wednesday evening, she'd already scheduled showings with 3 qualified buyers, and by Friday morning, exactly 72 hours after that text message had shattered my illusions, I had a full-price cash offer from a young couple desperate to close quickly before their corporate relocations. I signed the acceptance papers in Mark's office, my hand steady, my conscience clear. The house would close in 12 days, which meant Andrew and Lauren would return from their 2-week cruise to find their home had been sold out from under them. Some people might call that cruel. I called it consequences. But I wasn't done yet. While the sale moved forward with ruthless efficiency, I made other changes too. I called the credit card company and froze the card linked to their cruise reservation. Every spa treatment, every premium dinner, every excursion they'd charged to my account would be declined from that moment forward. I blocked both their phone numbers, routing all communication through Mark's office. And then I did something I hadn't done in over a decade. I went looking for an apartment just for me. I found it on the second day of searching. A small 1-bedroom place in a beachfront building 30 minutes from my old neighborhood. Far enough to feel like a fresh start, but close enough to stay connected to the few friends I had left. The apartment was modest, maybe even a little shabby compared to the house I'd been living in. But it had floor-to-ceiling windows facing the ocean, a tiny balcony where I could watch the sunrise, and a rent I could easily afford on my retirement income, without dipping into savings. I signed the lease and moved in over the weekend, taking only what was mine and leaving behind the guest room furniture I'd bought specifically for Andrew's visits, the extra kitchen equipment for hosting family dinners that never happened, all the trappings of a family life that had turned out to be an illusion. By the time the house closed the following Friday, I was already settled into my new life. The day Andrew and Lauren returned from their cruise, I was sitting on my little balcony, coffee in hand, watching fishing boats head out into the morning mist. My phone was off. I didn't need it on to know what was happening. Mark had arranged for the legal notice to be posted on their front door at exactly 8 a.m., the same time the new owners would be taking possession. The notice was clear, clinical, and devastating. This property has been legally sold. Your personal belongings have been placed in secure storage. You have 30 days to retrieve them. All inquiries should be directed to the office of Mark Davis, attorney at law. I imagine the moment they saw it. The confusion giving way to disbelief, giving way to panic. I imagine Lauren's face going pale as she realized the house they'd taken for granted was gone. I imagine Andrew frantically trying to call me, then Mark, then me again, his calls going straight to voicemail because I'd powered down my phone the night before. Let them panic, I thought, taking another sip of coffee. Let them feel a fraction of the fear and helplessness I've felt every time they've discarded me like trash, while still expecting me to fund their lifestyle. Some people would say I went too far, that I should have confronted them first, given them a chance to explain or apologize. But here's what those people don't understand. This wasn't about punishment. This wasn't even really about the house. This was about finally, after years of being used and dismissed and treated as less than family, choosing myself. It was about drawing a line and saying, this far and no further. It was about teaching my son and his wife the lesson they should have learned long ago, that love without respect is just exploitation wearing a mask. As the sun climbed higher and burned off the morning fog, I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The missed holidays, the ignored phone calls, the financial requests that never came with gratitude, the text message that had finally opened my eyes, and I realized something that filled me with a strange, powerful calm. I didn't regret a single thing. The first call came at 7:13 in the morning, exactly 47 minutes after Andrew and Lauren discovered the notice taped to their door. I know the exact time because even though my phone was powered off, it was still recording every missed call, every frantic voicemail, every desperate text message that flooded in like a digital tsunami. When I finally turned it on 3 hours later, sitting on my balcony with the morning sun warming my face, I watched the notifications pile up. 23 missed calls from Andrew, 15 from Lauren, 6 from my sister Cecilia, who I knew had been recruited into their campaign of guilt and outrage. The voicemails ranged from confused to angry to pleading to threatening, a whole spectrum of emotion that told me everything I needed to know about how they were processing the consequences of their own actions. But I didn't listen to a single one. Instead, I called Mark Davis. "Good morning, Julie," he answered, and I could hear the slight tension in his voice that meant he'd already been contacted. As we predicted, they've reached out. Multiple times. They're quite agitated. I assume they're claiming this is illegal, immoral, and every other negative adjective they can think of, I said calmly, watching a pelican dive into the waves below my balcony. That's a fair summary. Andrew maintains they've paid significant mortgage installments over the years and therefore have equity rights. Lauren is threatening to sue for emotional distress and unlawful eviction. They're demanding you reverse the sale immediately, which of course is impossible now that the new owners have taken possession. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the information settle. And what did you tell them? Exactly what we agreed. The property title is in your name. The transaction was entirely lawful. They have 30 days to retrieve their belongings from storage, and all future communication must go through my office. I also made it very clear that you do not wish to be contacted directly. He paused. Julie, I have to ask, are you prepared for how ugly this might get? The question hung in the air between us. Was I prepared? I thought about the last 5 years, about every slight and dismissal and calculated exclusion. I thought about being called not real family while they were spending my money on a luxury cruise, and I realized that whatever storm was coming, I'd already survived worse. I'd survived being erased by the people who should have loved me most. I'm prepared, I said simply. What's our next move? For now, we wait. They can threaten all they want, but legally they don't have a leg to stand on. No transfer of ownership was ever executed. No formal agreement exists giving them equity rights. The few mortgage payments they made don't establish ownership, especially when you've covered the vast majority of payments, plus all property taxes for 3 years. After I hung up with Mark, I sat in the quiet of my new apartment and let myself feel everything I'd been holding back. Not regret, nothing close to regret, but a deep, bone-tired sadness for what my family had become, for the relationship with my son that had rotted from the inside out while I'd been too afraid to acknowledge the decay, for my granddaughter Bella, who would grow up watching adults tear each other apart over pride and money, and wounds too deep to heal easily. But I also felt something else, something that had been absent from my life for so long I'd almost forgotten what it tasted like. Freedom. The freedom of not waiting for a phone call that would never come. The freedom of not wondering if this would be the month they finally included me. The freedom of not performing gratitude for the occasional crumbs of attention they tossed my way. I was free, and the price of that freedom was worth every bit of pain that was coming. The pain arrived faster than I expected. By noon, Lauren had posted an Instagram story. I didn't see it myself. My friend Barbara sent me a screenshot, her message filled with concern and outrage on my behalf. The post showed a photo of Lauren and Andrew looking somber and displaced, standing in front of what was clearly a storage facility. The caption read, "When you realize some people never accept that their children grow up and start their own families. Some mothers-in-law are toxic and controlling, even while pretending to help. Beware of gifts with invisible strings attached. Prayers for families dealing with manipulation." I stared at the screenshot for a long moment, then actually laughed out loud. The audacity of it was almost impressive. She'd twisted the entire narrative, casting herself as the victim of a controlling mother-in-law rather than a woman who'd systematically exploited and excluded someone for years. But this was Lauren's specialty, wasn't it? Rewriting reality until she became the protagonist of every story, the wronged party in every conflict, the misunderstood victim who deserved everyone's sympathy and support. I didn't respond. Not publicly, not privately, not at all. Silence, I was learning, was its own form of power. Let her perform for her Instagram followers. Let her craft whatever narrative she needed to protect her ego. The people who truly knew me would see through it, and the people who didn't know me well enough to see through it didn't matter anyway. But my sister Cecilia was a different story. She called that afternoon, and against my better judgment, I answered. Maybe I was hoping for support, or at least understanding. What I got instead was exactly what I should have expected. "Julie, what in God's name have you done?" Cecilia's voice came through the phone, sharp with accusation and disbelief. "Andrew called me this morning absolutely devastated. He says you sold their house without warning, that they came home from vacation to find all their belongings in storage. How could you do something so cruel?" I felt my jaw tighten, felt the old familiar pressure to apologize and explain and justify myself. But I didn't give in to it this time. The house was mine, Cecilia. My name on the deed, my money paying the mortgage. I exercised my legal right to sell my own property. But they're your family. Andrew is your son. You can't just throw them out on the street over some petty argument. "Petty?" I repeated, my voice going dangerously quiet. You think being excluded from a family vacation I helped pay for is petty? You think 5 years of being used for money while being erased from every important moment is petty? There was a pause. What are you talking about? So I told her. I told her about the text message that had arrived minutes before I was supposed to leave for the cruise. I told her about discovering they'd been charging spa treatments and premium excursions to my credit card while telling me I wasn't real family. I told her about missing Bella's baby shower, their anniversary party, countless other moments where I'd been deliberately excluded while they kept their hands out for my financial support. When I finished, Cecilia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in a softer but still skeptical tone, "That's hurtful. I understand. But selling their house seems like a massive overreaction. Where are they supposed to live now?" "The same place any other adults live when they can't afford to buy a house," I said. "They'll rent. They have jobs. They have savings. They'll figure it out the way millions of people figure it out every single day." "So this is about teaching them a lesson? About revenge?" The question made me pause because it wasn't quite right, but it wasn't entirely wrong either. It's about boundaries, Cecilia. It's about refusing to be exploited anymore. It's about showing them that treating people like disposable ATMs has consequences. Call it whatever you want, but I'm done apologizing for protecting myself. Cecilia sighed heavily. "I just hope you know what you're doing. This kind of thing tears families apart permanently." "The family was already torn apart," I said quietly. "I just stopped pretending it wasn't." After I hung up, I sat with the discomfort of that conversation, with the realization that even people who loved me might not understand what I'd done or why I'd done it. But their understanding wasn't required for my decision to be right. Some lessons in life we have to learn alone, in the dark, with nothing but our own conscience to guide us. 3 days passed in relative quiet. I spent them settling into my new space, walking the beach in the early mornings, reading books I'd been too stressed to focus on for years. Mark checked in daily to report that while Andrew and Lauren were still threatening legal action, they hadn't actually filed anything. He suspected they'd consulted an attorney who told them the truth. They had no case. Then, on the 4th day, something shifted. I was grocery shopping when I saw Helen, Lauren's mother, in the produce section. We'd met maybe a dozen times over the years, always cordial, but never close. She was examining avocados with the intense concentration of someone who wasn't really thinking about avocados at all. When she looked up and saw me, something flickered across her face. Not anger, surprisingly, but something closer to sadness mixed with resignation. "Julie," she said quietly, setting down the avocado she'd been squeezing. "I was hoping I'd run into you." I tensed, preparing for an ambush, another person recruited to make me feel guilty for protecting myself. But Helen's next words surprised me. "I need to talk to you about Bella. My granddaughter, the innocent casualty in this entire mess, the child who'd done nothing wrong but was suffering anyway, because the adults in her life couldn't behave like adults." My throat tightened. "What about Bella?" Helen glanced around the produce section, then gestured toward the small cafe attached to the grocery store. "Can we sit for a moment, please?" We bought coffees and found a corner table away from other shoppers. Helen wrapped her hands around her cup, like she needed its warmth, despite the summer heat outside. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and careful. "Bella is asking for you constantly, every day, multiple times a day. Where's Grandma Julie? When can I see Grandma Julie? Can we call Grandma Julie?" Helen's eyes met mine, and I saw genuine distress there. "She drew you a picture yesterday, a house by the ocean with 2 stick figures holding hands. She labeled them me and Grandma. Julie, regardless of everything happening between you and Andrew and Lauren, that child loves you. She misses you terribly." I felt tears prick my eyes, the first real tears I'd allowed myself since this whole thing started. Bella. My sweet, innocent granddaughter who used to light up when I walked into a room, who baked cookies with me and collected seashells and asked me to read the same picture books over and over because she loved the sound of my voice. I'd been so focused on protecting myself from Andrew and Lauren that I hadn't fully processed what losing access to Bella would mean. I miss her too, I whispered, more than I can express. Helen leaned forward. Then let's fix this. Not the situation with the house. That's between you and them. But this? A 4-year-old child being kept from her grandmother. This we can fix if you're willing. What are you suggesting? Supervised visits. I'll bring Bella to see you. I'll stay the entire time if that makes everyone more comfortable. 2 hours every Sunday afternoon. Andrew and Lauren have agreed, though they have conditions. Of course they had conditions. Even in this, even when it came to their own daughter's emotional well-being, they needed to maintain control. What conditions? The visits have to be supervised, meaning I'm present the entire time. You can't discuss the house situation or the conflict with Andrew and Lauren in front of Bella, and the visits happen at a neutral location, not at their current residence or yours. I wanted to be angry about the conditions, about being treated like I was some kind of threat to my own granddaughter. But then I thought about Bella's drawing, about her asking for me every day, and I realized my pride mattered less than her well-being. I accept the conditions, I said. When can we start? This Sunday? Around 2 o'clock? There's a park near the beach with a playground. We could meet there. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Helen reached across the table and briefly squeezed my hand. I know you and Lauren have a complicated relationship. I know my daughter can be difficult, but thank you for putting Bella first. That Sunday felt like the longest week of my life compressed into 5 days. I couldn't sleep Saturday night. Kept waking up with anxiety that something would go wrong, that they'd cancel at the last minute, that this fragile bridge to my granddaughter would collapse before I could cross it. But Sunday morning arrived clear and beautiful, and at 1:30 I was already at the park, sitting on a bench near the playground, watching other families play together while I waited for mine. They arrived at 2 o'clock exactly. Helen's car pulled into the parking lot, and I watched as she got out and opened the back door. And then there was Bella, wearing a yellow sundress I'd never seen before, her dark hair pulled into pigtails. She looked around the park uncertainly until Helen pointed in my direction. Bella's face transformed. Pure, uncomplicated joy spread across her features. And she started running toward me before Helen could even close the car door. "Grandma! Grandma Julie!" I stood up just in time to catch her as she launched herself into my arms. She was heavier than I remembered, taller too. 4-year-olds grow so fast, and I'd missed weeks of that growth. I buried my face in her hair and breathed in the scent of children's shampoo and sunshine and innocence. "I missed you so much," I whispered, and felt her little arms tighten around my neck. "I missed you more," she said seriously, pulling back to look at my face. "Where did you go? Mom said you moved away." "I moved to a new apartment," I said, choosing my words carefully. "By the ocean. You can hear the waves from my balcony." Her eyes went wide. "Really? Can I see it?" I glanced at Helen, who had approached but kept a respectful distance. She shook her head almost imperceptibly, reminding me of the boundaries. "Maybe someday soon," I said to Bella. "But today, how about we play on this amazing playground? I see swings and a slide and everything." The next 2 hours passed in a blur of pure, simple joy. We played on every piece of equipment. We collected interesting rocks and smooth pieces of driftwood from the beach nearby. We sat in the sand and Bella told me about preschool, about her best friend Maya, about the new goldfish they'd gotten named Rainbow. She asked me about the ocean near my apartment, about whether I'd seen any dolphins, about what I ate for breakfast every day. Normal, mundane, beautiful conversations that filled up the empty spaces in my heart. Helen watched from a nearby bench, close enough to supervise but far enough to give us space. I caught her eye once and mouthed, "Thank you," and she nodded with a small smile that told me she understood exactly how much this meant. When it was time to leave, Bella hugged me so tight I thought she might never let go. "Can I come back next week?" she asked, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "I hope so, sweetheart. We'll see what we can arrange." As I watched them drive away, Bella's little hand waving frantically from the back window, I felt a complicated mix of emotions: relief at seeing her, joy at our reconnection, but also deep, aching sadness at the artificiality of it all. We shouldn't need supervised visits in neutral locations. A grandmother and granddaughter shouldn't have to navigate the wreckage of adult conflicts just to spend time together. But this was the reality we had, and I was grateful for even these small, controlled moments. That night, I received an email. The sender was an address I didn't recognize, but the subject line made my stomach drop: "Legal notice regarding estate sale." My hand shook as I opened it. The email was from an attorney representing Andrew and Lauren. It outlined their intention to sue me for the return of all mortgage payments they'd made over the years, adjusted for inflation and with interest. They were also seeking damages for emotional distress, claiming my actions constituted elder abuse in reverse, financial manipulation, and intentional infliction of emotional suffering. I called Mark immediately, even though it was nearly 9 o'clock on a Sunday night. "I just saw the email," he said before I could even speak. "They sent it to my office as well. Julie, take a breath. This is exactly the kind of desperate jaggals, throwing everything at the wall strategy people use when they know they don't have a real case. But they're claiming I abused them," I said, hearing the shake in my voice. "That I manipulated them financially." "Mark, I gave them money because I wanted to help my son. How is that abuse?" "It's not. It's their attorney trying to find any possible angle to make you look bad. But here's what we know. You never signed a contract promising to transfer the house. You never created a formal loan agreement for the money you gave them. Legally, those were gifts. They can demand you return the small percentage of payments they made, and I actually think we should agree to that as a gesture of good faith. But the rest of this, the emotional distress and abuse claims, those won't hold up." I sat down heavily on my sofa, trying to process. "So what happens now? Now we respond formally, reaffirming your legal ownership and your right to sell. We offer to return their documented payments, adjusted appropriately, as a settlement. And we make it very clear that if they push this to court, we'll countersue for frivolous litigation and abuse of process." After we hung up, I sat in the dark of my living room, listening to the waves crash against the shore outside. The peace I'd felt after seeing Bella was gone, replaced by churning anxiety about lawyers and lawsuits and family relationships damaged beyond repair. Was this really what we'd become? People who communicated through attorneys and threw legal threats at each other instead of having honest conversations. But then I remembered that text message. "You're not coming, just real family." I remembered years of exclusion and exploitation, and I reminded myself that I hadn't created this situation. I'd simply stopped tolerating it. The next morning, I did something unexpected. I called Helen. "Helen, it's Julie. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." I took a deep breath. "How bad is it, really? Andrew and Lauren's situation?" There was a long pause. When Helen finally spoke, her voice was heavy with worry. "It's not good, Julie. Lauren lost her job about 3 months ago. She's been hiding it from everyone, including you. They were planning to use the house as collateral for a loan to get through this rough patch. When they came home and found out you'd sold it, everything collapsed. They're staying in my 1-bedroom apartment right now. All 3 of them crammed into a space meant for 1 person. Money is beyond tight. And the cruise?" She sighed. "That was actually Lauren's idea. She convinced Andrew they needed it to strengthen their marriage, that they were on the edge of falling apart, and this trip would save them." I closed my eyes, processing this information. So that's why I was excluded. Not because I'm not real family, but because Lauren didn't want me to see how bad things were between them. I think it was both, Helen said quietly. Lauren has always been threatened by your relationship with Andrew. She saw the cruise as a chance to have him completely to herself, away from everyone else's influence. But yes, she also didn't want you seeing how much they were struggling, how much the marriage was failing. And now, they're threatening to sue me. I know. I told them it was a terrible idea, that it would only make everything worse. But they're desperate, Julie. And desperate people do foolish things. After I hung up with Helen, I sat with this new information. Lauren had lost her job. Their marriage was falling apart. They'd been drowning financially even before I sold the house. None of this excused what they'd done to me, but it did provide context. It didn't make me the villain in their story, but it did make them more human, more complicated than just the ungrateful users I'd cast them as in my mind. 2 weeks crawled by. Mark handled all communication with their attorney, and I focused on building my new life. I registered for a watercolor painting class at the community center. I started volunteering at the local library's literacy program. I had coffee with Barbara and 2 other friends who rallied around me with fierce loyalty. And every Sunday, I met Bella at the park for our supervised visits, 2 hours of pure joy that made all the other chaos bearable. Then Mark called with news that changed everything. Julie, their attorney contacted me with a settlement proposal. They'll drop all legal action if you agree to reimburse them for the mortgage payments they can prove they made, adjusted for inflation as required by law. No interest, no emotional distress claims, no abuse allegations. Just a clean break. What changed? I asked, suspicious of the sudden reversal. Mark hesitated. I wasn't supposed to tell you this, but I think you deserve to know. Someone close to Andrew and Lauren forwarded their attorney a series of emails between the 2 of them. Emails from several months ago discussing strategies for eventually claiming full ownership of the house through legal mechanisms, without waiting for you to transfer it voluntarily. In one email, Lauren explicitly states there was never a verbal agreement that you'd transfer the title, that they were just hoping you'd do it eventually and they could push for it. My hands went numb. They were planning to take the house from me all along. It appears so. With those emails in play, their attorney knows they have no case. In fact, pursuing litigation would likely expose them to counterclaims. So they're backing down. I should have felt vindicated. I should have felt justified. Instead, I just felt tired and sad. How much did they actually pay? According to the documentation they provided, approximately 30% of the home's value over the past 2 years. I did the math in my head. It wasn't a small amount, but it wasn't close to what I'd contributed over 5 years. Still, returning it would mean this could end. We could close this chapter and maybe, possibly, begin the long, slow work of healing. I'll accept the settlement, I said. Reimburse them for what they can prove they paid, adjusted fairly. I want this over, Mark. Are you sure? You don't have to give them anything. Legally, you're in the clear. I'm sure. I don't want their money. I never wanted their money. I just wanted respect and boundaries. If returning what they paid helps us move forward, it's worth it. But even as I said the words, even as I agreed to the settlement that would end the legal fight, I knew something fundamental had broken between Andrew and me. Trust, once shattered this completely, doesn't simply glue back together. And lurking in the back of my mind was a growing worry about what Lauren might do next, because people who plan and scheme and manipulate don't usually stop just because one plan failed. I was right to worry. Within a week of the settlement being signed, Helen called me with panic in her voice, and the words she spoke made my blood run cold. Julie, Lauren is planning to move. She found a job offer in another city, 500 miles away, and she wants to take Bella with her. The world seemed to tilt sideways. After everything, After all the boundaries and legal fights and painful reconciliations, Lauren was going to do the one thing that would hurt me most. She was going to take my granddaughter away, and if she succeeded, I might never see Bella again. I didn't waste time spiraling into panic. Within an hour of Helen's call, I was back in Mark Davis's office laying out the situation with as much calm as I could muster, which honestly wasn't much. My hands shook as I explained Lauren's plan, the job offer in a city I'd never visited, the reality that supervised Sunday visits would become impossible across that kind of distance. Mark listened carefully, taking notes on his yellow legal pad, his expression growing more serious with each detail. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers, the gesture he always made when he was thinking through complex legal strategy. Julie, the good news is that Lauren can't simply take Bella out of state without Andrew's consent or a court order modifying their custody arrangement. Since they have joint custody established through their separation agreement, any relocation that significantly impacts the other parent's access requires legal approval. I felt a small flutter of relief, but it was quickly dampened by Mark's next words. The bad news is that if Lauren can demonstrate the move is in Bella's best interest, better job opportunity, better schools, stable housing, a judge might approve it despite Andrew's objections. Courts generally don't want to prevent a parent from pursuing legitimate opportunities for economic stability. So what do we do? Andrew needs to file for a temporary restraining order immediately, preventing Lauren from relocating with Bella outside the county until a formal custody hearing can be held. We need to document that this move isn't truly in Bella's best interest, but rather a way for Lauren to punish you and Andrew by cutting off access to the child. I called Andrew that night. It was the first time we'd spoken directly since the house sale, and the conversation was stilted and uncomfortable, both of us navigating around the hurt and anger that still hung between us. But when it came to Bella, when it came to protecting our ability to be in her life, we found common ground. "I can't lose her, Mom," Andrew said, his voice cracking. "She's the only good thing left from my marriage. If Lauren takes her across the state, I'll see her maybe once a month if I'm lucky. That's not being a father. That's being a distant relative who shows up occasionally." "Then we fight," I said firmly. "We file the restraining order. We go to court. We do whatever it takes to keep Bella close." "I already talked to a family law attorney this afternoon," Andrew admitted. "She says we have a decent case, especially since Lauren's job offer came so soon after the settlement. It looks retaliatory, like she's trying to punish us rather than genuinely pursuing a better opportunity." Over the next 3 days, the legal machinery ground into motion with frightening speed. Andrew filed for the temporary restraining order. The court scheduled an emergency hearing. Lauren was served with papers, and Bella, sweet, innocent Bella, was caught in the middle of adult warfare she couldn't possibly understand. Helen called me the night before the hearing, her voice heavy with exhaustion and grief. "Julie, I need you to know something. I love my daughter. But what she's planning, using Bella as a weapon to hurt you and Andrew, it's wrong. I've told her so. I've begged her to reconsider. She won't listen. Will you testify at the hearing if needed?" I asked gently. "About what's best for Bella." There was a long, painful silence. Then, "Yes. If the judge asks me, I'll tell the truth. Bella is thriving here. She has her father nearby. She has you back in her life now. She has friends and routine and stability. Uprooting her for a job Lauren may or may not keep, taking her away from everyone who loves her. That's not in Bella's best interest. That's in Lauren's interest." The hearing was held on a Thursday morning in a windowless courtroom that smelled like old wood and anxiety. I sat in the back row, not officially part of the proceedings, but unable to stay away. Andrew sat at one table with his attorney, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s named Rebecca Chen. Lauren sat at another table with her attorney, a younger man who kept glancing at his phone like he had somewhere better to be. The judge, A gray-haired woman named Judge Patricia Okonkwo reviewed the filings with careful attention before looking up at both parties. This court's primary concern is the best interest of the minor child, Bella Martinez. Miss Chen, you may present your argument for why the temporary restraining order should be granted. Rebecca stood and laid out the case methodically. Lauren's sudden job offer coming immediately after the settlement. The distance involved 530 miles to be exact. The impact on Andrew's ability to maintain a meaningful relationship with his daughter. The disruption to Bella's established routine and support system. She called Andrew to testify, and my son spoke about his daughter with such love and desperation that I found myself crying quietly in the back row. Then it was Lauren's turn. Her attorney argued that she had every right to pursue economic opportunity, that she'd been unemployed for months, and this job offer was a lifeline. He presented documentation of the position, the salary, the benefits. It all looked legitimate on paper, but when Lauren herself took the stand, something shifted. Ms. Martinez, Judge Okonkwo said, looking at Lauren over her reading glasses. This job offer, when did you first learn about it? About 2 weeks ago, Your Honor, Lauren answered, her voice steady and practiced. And when did you inform Mr. Martinez of your intention to relocate with your daughter? Lauren hesitated just a fraction of a second. Last week. Did you consult with him about this decision before accepting the job offer? Another hesitation. No, Your Honor. I didn't think I needed to. I'm her mother. Judge Okonkwo's expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker in her eyes. Ms. Martinez, you have joint legal custody with Mr. Martinez, correct? Yes. Then you absolutely did need to consult with him about a decision that would fundamentally alter his access to his child. The judge flipped through some papers. I'm also troubled by the timing here. This job offer materialized very shortly after you and Mr. Martinez finalized a contentious settlement regarding a property dispute involving Mr. Martinez's mother. From where I sit, this looks less like pursuing legitimate opportunity and more like retaliation. Lauren's attorney stood quickly. Your Honor, my client's employment situation and her family disputes are separate matters. Are they? The judge looked at him coolly. Because the pattern I'm seeing suggests otherwise. Ms. Martinez, let me ask you directly. If you're awarded this job and allowed to relocate, what provisions have you made for Bella to maintain her relationship with her father? Lauren shifted in her seat. He could visit on weekends, or we could meet halfway. 500 miles is a 10-hour round trip, Ms. Martinez. Do you genuinely believe a 4-year-old child should spend every other weekend in a car for 5 hours each direction? Do you believe that's in her best interest? The courtroom was silent. Lauren's face had gone pale. She didn't answer. Judge Okonkwo closed the file in front of her. I'm granting the temporary restraining order. Ms. Martinez, you are prohibited from relocating with the minor child outside of this county until a full custody hearing can be held to properly evaluate what arrangement serves Bella's best interests. That hearing will be scheduled within 60 days. In the meantime, the existing custody arrangement remains in effect. She looked at both attorneys. I strongly suggest your clients consider mediation rather than protracted litigation. This child needs her parents working together, not using her as ammunition in their personal conflicts. The gavel came down, and it was over. Lauren stood abruptly and left the courtroom without looking at Andrew or me. Her attorney followed, already talking on his phone. Andrew turned around and met my eyes, and I saw relief mixed with exhaustion on his face. We'd won this round, but the war wasn't over. Outside the courthouse, Andrew and I stood in awkward silence for a moment, before he finally spoke. Thank you for being here, Mom. I know this is all complicated, but when it comes to Bella... When it comes to Bella, we're on the same side, I finished. Always. He nodded, then surprised me by stepping forward and pulling me into a hug. It was brief and tentative, not like the easy embraces we'd shared when he was younger, but it was something. A small crack in the wall between us, a possibility of rebuilding. Over the next 6 weeks, life settled into a new rhythm. The threat of Lauren taking Bella away had been neutralized, at least temporarily. Andrew and I began meeting for coffee once a week, stilted conversations at first that gradually became more natural. We talked about Bella, about his job, about my new life in the beachfront apartment. We carefully avoided the house, the cruise, all the wounds still too fresh to examine directly. Lauren, meanwhile, seemed to collapse inward. According to Helen, she turned down the job offer rather than face the custody hearing that would likely result in Andrew getting primary placement. She found work locally, something below her qualifications but stable. She completed the family therapy program the court had mandated after the attempted relocation, and Helen reported that the sessions were actually helping, that Lauren was beginning to acknowledge her role in the family dysfunction. And Bella, resilient and adaptable the way children somehow manage to be, adjusted to her new normal. She lived primarily with Andrew now in a modest 2-bedroom apartment he'd rented near my place. I picked her up from preschool 3 afternoons a week, and we'd spend the hours until Andrew finished work doing homework, playing at the park, or just sitting on my balcony watching the waves. The supervised visits were a thing of the past. Trust, slowly and carefully, was being rebuilt. One Saturday afternoon, about 4 months after the cruise text that had started everything, Andrew and Bella came over for lunch. We were sitting on my balcony, Bella coloring at the small table I'd set up for her art projects, when Andrew asked me a question I hadn't expected. "Mom, do you regret it? Selling the house? All of it?" I watched Bella's careful concentration as she colored a picture of a beach scene, her tongue sticking out slightly the way Andrew's used to when he was deeply focused on something. I thought about the question carefully before answering. "No," I said finally. "It was drastic and it hurt all of us at the time. But Andrew, look at where we are now." I gestured at Bella, at the peaceful scene around us, at my son sitting beside me. If I hadn't done it, would we be here? Would you have left a marriage that was destroying you? Would I have stopped letting myself be used? Would any of us have learned that love without respect isn't actually love at all? Andrew was quiet for a long moment. "I think you're right. As painful as it was, it forced all of us to face truths we'd been avoiding. Me about my marriage, you about how we'd been treating you, even Lauren about her own behavior and motivations." He paused. "What I respect most, looking back, is that you never used Bella as a weapon. You never tried to turn her against Lauren. You never spoke badly about her mother in front of her. You kept the adult problems separate from Bella's relationships, even when Lauren wasn't doing the same. Bella deserves to love both her parents and both her grandmothers," I said simply. This was never about winning or losing. It was about teaching all of us that boundaries matter, that respect matters, that people aren't disposable just because they love you. Bella looked up from her coloring. "Grandma, can I show Mom my picture when she comes for dinner tomorrow?" Tomorrow, Sunday dinner. The first time Lauren would be joining us for a family meal since everything had fallen apart. Andrew had suggested it tentatively last week, and after talking with Helen, I'd agreed. Not because everything was fixed or forgiven, but because we had to start somewhere if this family was going to have any chance at healing. "Of course you can show her, sweetheart," I said. "I'm sure she'll love it." That Sunday dinner was perhaps the most uncomfortable meal of my life. Lauren arrived exactly on time, bringing a store-bought pie and an expression of careful neutrality. We greeted each other with stiff politeness, and for the first 30 minutes, conversation was painful and halting, focused entirely on Bella and neutral topics like the weather and her preschool activities. But then something unexpected happened. Bella, who'd been chattering happily through dinner, suddenly looked around the table at all of us and said, "I'm glad we're all together. This is nice." The simple, honest observation from a 4-year-old who just wanted her family to be okay cut through all our adult complications. Lauren's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly, and I saw her eyes fill with tears. "It is nice," she said quietly, looking at Bella rather than at Andrew or me. "It's very nice." The rest of the dinner was easier after that, not comfortable, not even close to how things had been before everything broke, but manageable. When Lauren was getting ready to leave, she paused at the door and turned to me. "Julie, I owe you an apology. For years of things, but especially for the cruise text. That was cruel, and it came from a place of insecurity and fear that I'd lose Andrew if you were too present in our lives." She took a shaky breath. "I was wrong about so many things, and I'm sorry." I could have dismissed it. I could have pointed out that an apology doesn't erase years of hurt or manipulation. But I thought about Bella, about the family we were trying to rebuild, about the fact that holding on to bitterness would only poison what we were working toward. "Thank you for saying that," I said. "I accept your apology. And Lauren, I'm sorry too, for selling the house the way I did, for not trying to talk to you and Andrew first, for letting my hurt drive me to such a drastic action. We all made mistakes here. It wasn't a movie moment. There were no tears and dramatic reconciliation hugs, but it was real, and sometimes real is more valuable than dramatic. The months that followed brought gradual healing. Lauren and I would never be close, but we learned to be civil, then cordial, then something approaching friendly for Bella's sake. Andrew and I rebuilt our relationship slowly, with honest conversations about the past and clear boundaries for the future. I established a college fund for Bella separate from anything her parents could access, ensuring my granddaughter's educational future regardless of what happened between the adults. And I built a life for myself that wasn't defined by being needed by my son's family. I took art classes and made new friends. I volunteered at the library and started a book club. I dated briefly, nothing serious, but it reminded me I was still a person with desires and possibilities, beyond being someone's mother or grandmother. One evening, almost 6 months after that first painful Sunday dinner, I was sitting on my balcony watching the sunset when my phone rang. It was Andrew. "Mom, I have something to tell you, and I wanted you to hear it from me first." He paused, and I could hear nervousness in his voice. "Lauren and I have decided to try reconciliation. We're going to couples counseling, taking it very slowly, but we want to see if we can rebuild our marriage." My first instinct was panic, worry that this meant going back to the old patterns, back to being excluded and used. But then I heard something in Andrew's voice that hadn't been there before. Maturity, clarity, strength. "With very clear boundaries," he continued. "We've both changed. The therapy has helped us understand what went wrong and what needs to be different. And Mom, one of those boundaries is that you're always included. Always. You're not just family when it's convenient. You're family. Period." I felt tears running down my cheeks. The good kind this time. "I'm proud of you, Andrew, for doing the work, for setting boundaries, for choosing growth instead of repeating old patterns. I learned from the best," he said quietly. "You showed all of us what it looks like to choose yourself without destroying everyone around you. That's not an easy lesson, but it's one we all needed." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The cruise text that had shattered my illusions. The decision to sell the house that had broken open our family's dysfunction. The legal battles and painful conversations and gradual rebuilding of trust. None of it had been easy. All of it had been necessary. Would I do it differently if I could go back? Maybe. Probably. There were things I could have handled better, conversations I could have initiated before taking such drastic action. But I also knew that sometimes the only way to break a toxic pattern is to do something so shocking that everyone has to stop and reassess. Sometimes destruction has to come before reconstruction. A year to the day after the cruise text, I hosted a family dinner at my apartment. Andrew and Lauren working on their marriage one day at a time. Bella, now 5 and starting kindergarten. Helen, who'd become an unexpected friend and ally. My sister Cecilia, who'd come around once she understood the full story, even my friend Barbara, who'd supported me through the worst of it. We gathered on my balcony as the sun set, sharing food and stories and laughter. Bella ran between the adults, showing off her latest drawings and asking endless questions the way 5-year-olds do. At one point, she climbed into my lap and said, "Grandma, I like your house. It smells like the ocean and chocolate chip cookies." "Thank you, sweetheart," I said, kissing the top of her head. "I like it too." Looking around at the people gathered there, at the imperfect but genuine connections we'd rebuilt from the ashes of what had broken, I realized something profound. Home isn't a building or a title deed or a mortgage payment. Home is the people who see your worth and choose to honor it. Home is boundaries respected and love given freely, rather than extracted through obligation. Home is the hard work of forgiveness and the courage to demand better from the people who claim to love you. As the last light faded from the sky and stars began to appear overhead, Bella pointed at the brightest one and made a wish. I didn't ask what she wished for, but I made my own silent wish. Not for perfection or for the past to be erased, but for continued growth and healing, for my son to keep building a marriage based on mutual respect, for my granddaughter to grow up knowing her worth, and for myself to never forget the lesson I'd learned so painfully, that the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for others is to refuse to accept less than you deserve. The evening ended with hugs and promises to do it again soon. As everyone left and I stood alone on my balcony once more, I felt a deep sense of peace, not the peace of everything being fixed, because families are never fully fixed, but the peace of knowing I'd survived the breaking and come out stronger on the other side, the peace of self-respect reclaimed, the peace of boundaries honored, the peace of love that doesn't require you to make yourself small. So let me leave you with this final thought, because I know some of you watching right now are in similar situations. You're the giver in your family, the one everyone turns to when they need something but forgets when it's time to give back. You're wondering if you're being unreasonable to want more, if you're selfish to set boundaries, if you're wrong to demand respect alongside the love you freely give. Here's what I learned through all of this. You are not responsible for other people's growth at the expense of your own well-being. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. And you are absolutely, unquestionably allowed to say no more when relationships become one-sided, exploitative, or harmful. Will it be messy? Yes. Will people call you selfish or cruel or vengeful? Probably. Will you doubt yourself at 3 a.m. wondering if you made the right choice? Definitely. But on the other side of that pain, if you stay true to yourself and refuse to accept treatment that diminishes you, there's a possibility of something better, not perfect, not without scars, but authentic and honest and built on a foundation of mutual respect rather than convenient exploitation. My family will never be what it was before the cruise text, before the house sale, before everything broke open. But maybe what it was before wasn't actually that good. Maybe it needed to break, so it could be rebuilt into something healthier. And maybe, just maybe, the bravest thing you can do for the people you love is to love yourself enough to demand they treat you better. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose between keeping peace in your family and protecting your own dignity? What did you choose, and what happened? And if you're facing that choice right now, what's holding you back from setting the boundaries you know you need? Your story matters. Your experience could be exactly what someone else needs to hear to find their own courage. So share it in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, if it made you think or feel or reconsider your own family dynamics, hit that subscribe button, because every day I bring you story of complicated truth, of family loyalty, betrayal, and the price we pay for our own peace. This channel is a community of people who understand that love isn't simple and family isn't always easy. Stay for the next one. You might just find the permission you've been waiting for to finally choose yourself. Thank you for listening to my story, and thank you for being here.